react.
Here we go.
Okay. Good morning, everyone. I'm Kevin Allen, and I'm joined by my usual podcast partner, former NHL defenseman Tom Laidlaw. And we have another very special guest today. It's going to be a three-person show for the entire 30 minutes. And that, of course, I'm sure you recognize him already, a former, and boy, it bothers me to say that, former NBC broadcaster, Mike Emrick, who is here to talk about the fact that he retired, and also that he has a new book. And, you know, I believe in full transparency. And so I need to inform you that I'm part of that book process, that I work with Mike on that book. So we'll talk a little bit about that as well. But, Mike, welcome to the Laidlaw and Allen Report.
Thank you very much. Why is it that the guy that does all the work on the book gets smaller billing on the cover and smaller print on the cover than the guy that coasts along? That's the thing I don't understand. There have been a couple of other writers that I've done interviews with this past week who have wondered the same thing. So, gee, Kevin's print on the front of the book after doing all the work is much smaller than yours. So if we do another one, which we've already talked about, we'll have to change that. You'll get 20 typeface in bold.
Yeah, but Doc, I have to deal with Kevin all the time, and he's in 37 Hall of Fames or something like that. So I have to deal with that.
Yeah, Tom has the tendency to exaggerate
No,
a little bit. But anyway, Doc, let's start. I just want to ask you, you know, you retired on one day, and then you started the book promotion on the other day, which was totally a coincidence. You and I laugh about this because the book has been planned for 6 months. And you didn't know exactly when you were going to announce your retirement. Obviously, you made that decision during the playoffs. But because of that, has it even sunk in? Because you have jumped right into book promotion. You probably are as busy as you ever were, maybe more. I don't know.
Yeah, it'll probably sink in sometime after the new year. But maybe if we have a season by that time, I'll get lost in watching games again. I suppose the real loud quiet will come if we don't have a season starting at the 1st of January, because I'm advised by the people at Triumph Books, and you probably have heard the same thing, that all of this will let up right around Christmas, and there won't be as much of the interviewing and shows and things like that to do. That part I'll miss. There's an awful lot about this that I'll miss, but I'm sure glad that so far that Joyce and I have our health and we're able to kind of move into this next chapter of our life, not really knowing what it's going to be like. We had sort of a clue, Kevin, didn't we? The last 7 months, especially mine, when I was able to work from home, and we were all just sort of landlocked here, waiting for hockey to resume, and then it did in a wonderful way. But the Monday before the Tuesday launch was the day that it kind of had to be. And I hope you don't mind a little bit of detail. The decision was made somewhere in the third round of the 4 rounds of the playoffs, when it sort of became apparent to me that this was the appropriate time in my life to be ending this after 50 years and 10 of the years watching Tom Laidlaw play. And that didn't rush me to my decision. But it seemed like the right time. And then because it was not about me, it was about the athletes completing a wonderful playoff. So that was no time to say anything. And then there was the draft, and that was no time to say anything. And then there was free agency. And then when I informed NBC a week before the announcement was actually made, they had the idea of doing a video that would be sort of an essay video on my leaving. But Vinny Costello, who did a brilliant job on the essay, also had some football obligations that week. And so the time that he could devote to it, and he spent about 3 days on it, took it over the weekend. And so that left Monday as the day that it had to be. And then Tuesday was the launch date. So, Kevin, if you ever retire from writing and you also author a book, don't put one on one day and one on the other. It's not really a good idea. It may help the book, but it's not really a good idea. Tom, where are you these days?
I'm living in Greenwich, Connecticut, Doc. I've got 2 sons that live in the area here. They're with the Rye, which is the next town over. So settled in here. great.
He's always been a go-getter, Kevin, hasn't he? And of course, Tom
Yes.
knows that this is one of the things that I always considered one of the great stories about Tom Laidlaw is that the Rangers were doing paid tuition on various educational opportunities, and Tom took the tuition opportunity to learn truck driving in northern New Jersey. And I wonder if you're still licensed.
No, I don't think the license is any good, Doc. You know, it's a great story because I don't see Doc that often, but whenever I do, I think the last time we were at the outdoor game, the alumni game in Philadelphia between the Rangers and the Flyers. So we had all these people, Mark Messier's around and Brian Leach and everything. And Doc comes up to the whole table, and the only thing he wants to talk about is my truck driving school.
And I thought it was terrific.
Yeah, I love
What was the one thing that you learned from that struck you that you didn't know about driving a big rig?
Wow, what's the one thing I learned? You know what, Doc? Honest to God, it's one of those things that I've learned a lot of lessons. Like I've been on a TV show, Survivor, and I've been an agent, and all these different things I've done. And I think it's just there's another example for me. Is just if you want to do something, go do it. Like there's really no purpose in me going to truck driving school. I just wanted to learn how to drive a truck. So I try to tell people now when I go around and speak to people, that's if you've got things that you dream about doing, go do it. And
I'll bet when you're on the expressway up there in Connecticut, the last thing you do is pass a semi and then cut him off.
Oh yeah, no, it's not right.
That's right.
And actually, I go the other way around. If they're trying to get through traffic, I will stop and save the lane for them so they can get in traffic and everything like that. And so I'm more truck drivers. I'm also careful not to just trust all truck drivers too, because one of the guys that was in my class that was driving with us in the truck was a cab driver from New York City, and he wouldn't stop at stop signs. So we're out, and for the instructor, so the instructor finally threw him out of the truck and left him out on the road because he wouldn't stop anymore. So I just don't blindly trust truck drivers.
That's classic.
Yeah.
Well, I'm going to show the book for everyone, and then we're going to get into talking about Doc's life, not just from the book, but all aspects of it. So, here's the book. I hope everybody can see it here, and it's available on Amazon. We're going to some shameless self-promotion here.
Well, look at the difference in the print. Show the book. Now look at the size of my name. Look at the size of Kevin's. We got to change that next time.
Yeah, I'm actually totally fine with that. Any association I have with Mike Emmerich is a good one, regardless of whether my name is 14 point or 18 point. So I really, really appreciated being part of all this. And as everyone knows, I've written a lot of books, and I'm not sure I had any more fun than I had with Mike doing this book. It was so much fun going back, and I tell this story all the time. Usually I'm hired for my expertise in writing, but Mike could have written this book himself. Mike brought me along because I know how to organize it, and he had never done it.
That's right. Yeah, so, that had a lot to do with it, but it wasn't going to go anywhere if you hadn't stepped aboard. I ambushed you in 2017 coming out of a press conference in Pittsburgh. I remember the location.
I remember the conversation, yeah.
If I ever go back there, I'm going to paint an X on the floor. Because that was where I ambushed you, and you agreed, and boy, was that ever meaningful. Okay, I interrupted you. Go ahead.
No, not at all. But I did want to talk. I think it's really meaningful that behind Doc right now you see a Port Huron Flags jersey, and of course that was his first pro broadcasting experience. He was called the Flags games, and what's interesting about that, at least from the book perspective, is my association with Doc sort of started because we both went through Port Huron. I worked for the Port Huron Times Herald, and by the time I got there, the Flags had become a junior team. So I missed out on all the fun he had with minor league. But I did get to cover the Port Huron junior Flags as they were after he left. But Doc, let's start there. I wanted to bring up, and people are going to note that on the book, it's Off Mike, which is a interesting title. And I want to tell the story about this. Is we couldn't come up with the title until the very last minute, and then it just seemed like the perfect title. Like I thought, why didn't we come up with this before? Like Off Mike is just absolutely perfect. But anyway, underneath it said how a kid from basketball crazy Indiana became America's NHL voice. And I really kind of fought to get that in there because I'm not sure the publisher thought initially it was a good idea, because I just think that's such a unique story. Like, anybody who knows, has seen the movie Hoosier, knows that Indiana, especially when Mike was growing up, was basketball country. There was no hockey, and he can tell the story about this better than I can. But and for him to rise out of that and end up becoming the NHL broadcaster out of Indiana, when I grew up in Michigan, where I had Hockey Night in Canada all the time. We had the broadcast, obviously, with Kelly, Dan Kelly, and all of that. And Mike came out of Indiana. So, Mike, let's go back to it's LaFountain, right? I hope LaFountain, Indiana, and tell everybody sort of how in the world the path that you end up becoming a hockey broadcaster out of Indiana.
Tom, what was the population of your town?
Oh, well, I didn't really live in a town. I lived out in a farm. So
See?
Yeah.
The roots of hockey are rural Canada.
Yeah.
And the roots of basketball, even though James Naismith was celebrated for inventing the sport, the roots of basketball are rural Indiana, Illinois, Iowa, a lot of those small towns. Our town, as documented to me yesterday by a talk show host in Tampa, is now up to 833. It's never been 1,000, but at that time it was 627. And like the movie Hoosiers, our gym was compact, had a stage at one end. The band sat on the stage and played, just like in the movie. We had a trophy case at the other end that was out in the hallway, unlike it could be rammed through by somebody going through on a layup. And one thing that was unveiled this past week, I was reminded of it, was that I played seventh grade basketball. I did remember that, but I was prodded into it. And I was actually taught to shoot baskets underhand, like Ollie in the movie Hoosiers.
Sure.
There was a chart on the wall in our gym that taught us how to shoot baskets, free throws, and we were to shoot underhand. And with 2 seconds left in our game between LaFountain and Rowan, we were trailing by 2, and I was given a 2-shot foul. And with 2 seconds left, I actually scored both. We went to overtime and won the game. The backstory is we were the 7th grade team from LaFountain, and we were beating the 6th grade from Rowan. So I guess we should have won the game anyway. And we all got to the dressing room and said we had them all the way. But that was the growing up years. I saw hockey for the first time in Fort Wayne, and it was this team wearing this jersey, the Fort Wayne Comets, and I was hooked. I went into the arena wanting to be a baseball announcer, and I came out wanting to broadcast hockey. And you can imagine what a guidance counselor, seeing this teenager across from him in his office saying that he wanted to be a professional hockey announcer, had to say, or what his reaction might be, because it was not the normal thing you would experience in rural Indiana. That was it. And then it was just, how do you do that? How do you get to be that? And that's really what the book is about. And a lot of the stories that were told along the way, including stories in Port Huron and in Maine. And the miners, and Tom didn't spend much time in the miners, but he does remember how unpretentious they were and how you'd have promotions that wouldn't necessarily all go perfectly, although most of them in Maine did, not all of them in Port Huron did. And that was some of the hilarity that got documented in the book that had to be heavily organized by the man in the upper right corner of the screen I'm looking at right now.
Very cool. Well, Doc, obviously, I think it goes without saying what a great career you have had behind the mic. But I think the thing that impresses me the most is what I've heard people, the way they talk about you now, especially upon, not just about your retirement, but even when you're working, it's the way you carry yourself and the way you treat people. Is your thought, is that just who you are?
No, I suppose, I guess that's just the way I am. I don't know what, Tom, sometimes if you're in a small town, the upside is that everyone knows everyone. The downside is everybody knows everyone. and you become, I suppose, more folksy, more homey, and people matter. But I'm sure that there are grumpy people that come from small towns too. But some of it is an outgrowth of how I was raised, and some of it is the faith that I adopted at a very young age and tried to live out as the years went on. And a lot of it is, who can be unhappy if they're in hockey? Because most everybody's in a good mood, unless you're expected to score 40 and you're in a slump and it's gone on for a month and a half. Most times, everybody that goes to work is in a good mood. And when you perpetuate that for 47 years of being around people that are in a good mood, it's pretty hard to be in a bad mood yourself. So I've been pretty lucky. See that smile on Tom's face? He's been that way all his life. I've seen him that way for 10 years in the NHL.
Well, it is interesting, Doc, because I feel the same way. I just feel like I've been so lucky in my life to do the things we've done, in the game and after the game, as an agent for 22 years and all the other things that I've got to do. And it all came from, like you said, from the growing up in the farmland and the way my parents and grandparents worked and the way they lived their lives. So I agree with you entirely. Yeah. We're lucky.
Yeah, and you can choose if you're not raised in that atmosphere. You can make a choice. I remember talking to Jake Voracek about a year ago in the Philadelphia dressing room, and there he was sitting. Now the Flyers weren't having a very good stretch at the time, and there was Jake with a smile on his face, and he was having a goal-scoring drought too. And I said, Jake, every time I'm around you, you've got a smile. And every time I'm around you, you're shaking hands and asking how people are, including myself. What's going on with you, Jake? And he said, being happy is a choice. And being around people that are happy is a choice. You can select your friends. And that's just the way I am. And I thought, he's probably going to come out of the slump. He's probably going to be okay in playmaking. He's probably going to be okay because he's got young Jake at home and he's happy and he talks to his parents overseas and they watch all his games till 4:30 in the morning. Sounds like he comes from a good family and he probably has enjoyed life all the way along. So why change it now? And so we don't cheer for teams because we're network announcers, but that doesn't mean you don't silently cheer for individuals along the way. And so Jake's always been one of the guys I've liked wherever he played.
Very cool.
Mike, I wanted to ask you a little bit about the difference between being a team broadcaster where you follow one specific team and then being the national. Now, not everybody had the experience to be able to do both of those, and you did it with two different NHL teams, the Devils and the Flyers, and then you became a national broadcaster. What's the difference in the approach, and how did it impact your lifestyle?
Well, in a one-team town, almost exclusively, there's the expectation that you're for the home team. Now, I'm a Pirates fan, and I love Greg Brown's broadcasts, and I was sold to the Pirates by Bob Prince because they were biased and they cheered for my team. So I understand the approach in a one-team town, and I wasn't necessarily the answer in Philadelphia during the 5 years that Bill Clement and I were there together, because the Flyers missed the playoffs 4 of the 5 years, and it was hard to be the enthusiastic guy on the Flyers side for me. Doesn't mean that they weren't worth cheering for. It's just that it was a hard pull for me there. And the expectation was that was part of the job. In New Jersey, because it was a 3-team area, there was the expectation, and not only my bosses at Sports Channel and later in MSG told me that, but also Lou Lamoriello, who was running the team. If you can't say what you think, you're no good to me. And he also said that it is expected that, yes, you talk about the Devils more than you talk about the other team, but you have to have credibility in the marketplace too. And so the announcers that covered Tom's games, the announcers that covered the Islanders games, the announcers that covered the Devils games certainly talked about their team more than the others, but they also had to have credibility in the marketplace, which meant talking about the other team and also understanding that there were going to be nights they weren't going to win. And so you had to ride the tide when it came to that too. And the network telecasts for me, when I was doing Devils games, weren't that great an adjustment at all. The only difference was the amount of time you spent on the two teams. It went to 50-50 instead of, say, 70 for the Devils and 30 for the other team in terms of the amount of time you spent on them. But it was, as I said, it went more to 50-50 on the network broadcast. And the adjustment in terms of energy or emotion or anything else was not different at all.
What about lifestyle, Mike? How did that impact lifestyle? I mean, I always said, being a national writer when I was at USA Today, the difference was in the playoffs is I never had a home game. Unless. I see what you mean. Yeah. Well, the advantage in being a network broadcaster for us was that we both liked it on the Great Lakes, and we liked it back here in see, this is Michigan. All right. So this is where we are down here. And this was where my first job was. It's where I met my wife, Joyce. We've been married 42 years now. And it's where we thought we'd have to retire to come back to. When you're a network announcer, they let you live where you want to. And so for 25 years, we've been based back here. What that means is a lot more flights, a lot more travel, but when the work is done, you get to come back to a place that you like. And she was able to base her time back here at a time when both my parents and hers were getting much older. And it was very helpful for us to be based back here closer to home. So it worked out well for us. The only disadvantage was that it put me on airplanes more often than it might have had I been based in the East. And when 9/11 came, it required more time to be spent in airports before flights. So John Davidson and I did not have a contest, but in the year 2005-2006, which was John's last year broadcasting before he got into the hierarchy of managing hockey teams as a president, with OLN, with NBC, with his Ranger games, and with the Olympics in Torino, he did 153 games. Wow. I did 152. Wow. So he passed me by one. And that night was we had a lot of 7-game series in the playoffs, including the final between Carolina and Edmonton. And we left the arena in Raleigh way ahead of everybody else because all the fans stayed in and celebrated and watched everything that was going on the ice. When we were done with the broadcast, there was still a lot more going on. Now, I'll never forget John and I going out into the parking lot. There was a car waiting to take us back to the hotel. And I'm 5'7" and John's 6'4". And he's the only guy that can find the car because he's tall enough to go up and down all the rows of cars and locate where there are a set of headlights on. So he found our car and we got away, and there was no traffic after the game whatsoever because they were all still inside celebrating. And that was our last game together in 2006.
Wow. So, Doc, I'm going to give you a hard time a little bit. Now, show me Michigan again.
I guess this is kind of it. Now, the Upper Peninsula is here and the bridge is here.
Thank you. Okay. I got to go to Michigan University. We got to get that correct.
Yes, okay? That's right. Okay, so that's up here and you're here.
Thank you very much. Thank you. All right, the next thing is, now I'm going to stir the pot here a little bit again. I'm going to one of my former teammates, Ron Greshner, claims that you did not like the Rangers because you worked for the Devils and the Flyers.
No, are you kidding? He just considered that a rivalry. That's not true. As a matter of fact, I liked Ron a lot. I remember he had a penalty shot in St. Louis. Unfortunately, didn't score on it, but I remember he had a penalty shot in St. Louis. Number 4. I liked Ron a lot. So it may have been a perception that may have been his perception that I didn't like the Rangers at all, but I'll maintain it's not true, but sometimes perception is reality. So if he thought it was true, he can certainly go with that if he wants.
So we do a show every Thursday. Ron Greshner and Dave Maloney and I do a show on Facebook Live as well. We have guests on. So I'm going to I'll call him out tomorrow at 2:00. That is not true at all.
Well, you can have me as a guest on it, and then he can attack me.
Okay, excellent. Okay, you're on. You're on tomorrow.
Okay.
Yeah. I want to just go back a little bit. You alluded to the fact there were some great minor league stories, and I'd love for you to give our viewers, a little bit of taste of kind of the book in terms of maybe just tell one of the minor league promotion stories. I got to tell you, Doc, the people I've talked to about the book, everyone I talk to, the first thing they bring up is either the Sue Hamilton story or the wedding story. So either story in the condensed abridged version might be appropriate right here.
Yeah. Well, Steve Coates is still a broadcaster in Philadelphia, so maybe I'll do the one in Des Moines. So the bus rolls into Des Moines. We played 2 games in Des Moines because it was 14 hours away. So you go out there and you play 2 instead of 1. You drive out Thursday, you play Friday, Saturday, you drive back on Sunday. So the game on Friday, Des Moines usually had a weak crowd on Friday, but a strong one on Saturday, because there were high school athletics on Friday, either basketball or in the fall football. So the bus rolls in for the morning practice, and Paul Vigilante, who to this day works with baseball in Fort Wayne, was at that time the PR guy for Des Moines. So I'm sitting in the stands watching Des Moines skate before Port Huron goes out, and he said, I should mention to you that the first intermission is going to be about 10 minutes longer than normal tonight because we're going to have a wedding on the ice at the end of the first. And I said, okay. So he told me that the president of the Des Moines Capitals Booster Club was going to marry one of the members, and they thought it would be cool to have it during a game. Great. Danny Belisle is coach of Des Moines. Bob McCammon is coach of Port Huron. Ron Fournier is the referee. All of them went on to NHL positions. And Steve Coates, of course, was playing for Des Moines. So he went on to play in the NHL for Detroit and is still in the league today. So the first period ends. The Port Huron players go to the dressing room. The Des Moines players are asked to stay out on the ice. And a white mat is rolled out from the end boards all the way to center ice. Another mat goes along the checkered red line. That's for the groom and the minister. The bride is to come out from the long end boards, and along either side of the long white mat for the bride, the Des Moines players, perspiring heavily at the end of the first period, are standing on either side of this mat with their sticks held up and the blades touching to form an arch. And it is underneath this that she is to march out to center ice. I'm sure it didn't smell like a church to her. So anyway, she gets out to center ice. There's a microphone that comes down from the ceiling. The minister goes through a very short ritual. They say their vows very quickly. They're presented as man and wife. He kisses her. They lock arms, and they're headed back out under this arch of hockey sticks. In those days in the Midwest, there was a tradition called throwing rice. They didn't have rice in Des Moines, but boy, did they have everything else. And all of it comes over the screens. No glass in Des Moines. It comes over the screens out onto the ice. There was so much debris that the 2 rink attendants had to detach the nets and push them around like rakes to scoop up all the debris, and the delay was 45 minutes, not 10. And I was on the air by myself, all but 5 minutes that was sent for a newscast in Port Huron. That's called guts broadcasting. And they thought they'd get 1,800 fans that night instead of the usual 1,500. What was it, Kevin? 20?
Almost 3,000.
Yeah, they did really well. I mean, the promotion paid off. And I don't know if the couple is still, because it's been so long, I hope they're still living, and I hope they're still married. I don't know.
That's a good story.
Yeah, just to be able to hear Doc tell that story, and boy, wouldn't you have loved to hear Doc broadcasting a wedding back?
No. But there was a play-by-play, and I actually did a little pre-wedding interview and taped it with the groom, and my questions were bad, and his answers were short because he wasn't used to being interviewed. But it seemed like the thing to do because I was going to have time to kill, 10 minutes. Turned out to be 45, but it's what it is.
One of your coworkers, Brian Boucher, was a client of mine when I was in the agent business, represented him. Has he done many impressions for you? Have you ever heard any of them?
Yes. As a matter of fact, he called after my announcement and did an impression as Dominic Hasek and left a phone message as Dominic Hasek.
I've heard that one.
Yeah, and it's fantastic. And, of course, it'll be saved forever.
Oh, good.
He has... He was, it was one of the recollections that I had when I considered retiring was him talking about Ken Dryden. he was discussing Ken Dryden. How old is Brian? Brian's not 50, is he?
No, not 50. No.
No.
Yeah.
He was just in one of our telecasts in either the second or the third round. He was talking about Ken Dryden, and I thought, he's not old enough to even have ever seen Ken Dryden play. And here I am, the first year that I covered the Penguins 50 years ago. Ken was a rookie, and I got to see him play while he was writing his exams at Cornell. And all of that led me to believe that not only had a lot of time passed, but I was very lucky to still, despite cancer, have my health all these years. And it was not one of the pivotal things that led me to retire, but led me to consider how lucky I've been all this time. And maybe this was a good time to just enjoy that. So
Brian did, when I was representing him, and he was in Philadelphia playing, we were in the middle of a contract negotiation. And you remember Tim Panaccio, the writer?
Yeah.
So Bush did a fantastic impression of Tim Panaccio.
Really?
Yes.
I haven't asked him about that one.
You got to do it. So Brian called me one day in the middle of these negotiations, and he pretended he was Tim Panaccio asking questions about the negotiations. I actually believed it was Tim Panaccio. So I went into agent mode and started being very careful with my answers and everything. And Bush continues on, and he thinks that I know it's him. He doesn't know that I think it's Tim Panaccio at this point. And finally, he says, "Tom, it's Bush." And now I still didn't believe that it was Brian. I thought it was Tim Panaccio trying to trick me. I think I had Bush hang up and had to call him back. Yeah, he's good.
That's
so you should, I probably shouldn't tell this out of school, but you should know that Brian got fooled once himself. So he and Eddie Olczyk and I are going out to dinner in Washington. Dinner is not something I do very often because I'm not very good at eating at night. But for a celebration, the three of us decided to have, we went out to dinner in Washington. And I tipped off John Forslund that afternoon and said, the three of us are going out. And I was wondering if you would send me a phone message pretending to be Chuck Caton, because John does a tremendous Chuck Caton impression. Oh. And it sounds just like him. So anyway, while we're in the car going over to the restaurant, which took about 5 minutes, I said, I got a phone message this afternoon, which was pretty funny, from Chuck. And he said, "Oh, go ahead and play it." And so I played the message, and both of them are laughing. And even after it was over, Brian did not know it was John. Wow. So if you ever get John on, have him do Chuck. Or if you get Chuck on, have him do Chuck.
There you go. That's a good match. I remember Chuck way back in the Hartford days too, right? Doesn't he go that far back?
Oh, yeah.
Magnificent announcer. We all borrow from each other. And Bill Clement and I are standing outside the Hartford Civic Center at a hot dog stand the night before the Flyers play. And the Whalers are playing back to back. They're playing somebody else that night. And the guy at the hot dog stand has the radio on. And I'm listening to the game, and it's going into overtime. And in the last minute, it goes to overtime. In the last minute, Chuck is describing the game, and I'm hearing it on the radio. And he said, and the Whalers dumped the puck in with the goalie pulled, and they pour in after it. And I thought, gee, that's a great line. So I stole it from Chuck. I've been using it ever since. We all borrow, but that was one I got that night at a hot dog stand from Chuck Caton.
Mike, we're running out of time.
Oh, here. Sorry.
Oh, no.
What else?
Before you go, I want to ask you to maybe tell our viewers what your plans are in retirement. I know we are still going to see a little bit on these vignettes, right?
Yes. One of the great things about the call that I made to Sam Flood 2 weeks ago, Monday, to just tell him that this was it, was at the end of the call, he said, "I hope that you'll be willing to stay on and do some video essays." And that was good news, because all of us like to have a team jersey, every year and still be on the roster, even though it may not be in the same role that we always had. So that was really good news for me. And as Kevin knows, Joyce and I have been very partial to animal causes all these years. And so the proceeds from the book go to that. And I have all of these analog guides that Kevin has seen in my office. The office, by the way, has now been emptied. If any of you have seen the Storage Wars, you know what that is like, and those roll up. Yeah. So I've got one whole storage unit that is full of analog guides, some of whom have Tom's picture in them. And I'm thinking that, for example, a Rangers guide from 80-81 might not have much value at all. But to a Rangers fan, maybe the guides from, say, 78 all the way through to when they discontinued publishing guides, 5 years or so ago, all of those from all of those years collectively may have some value, and maybe they would, if I can figure out a platform to put them available on, might want to bid for them, and all of that cash would go toward hands-on care of animals too, and it would help me empty the storage unit. So that's the objective of these days. Once I get into the new year and the books are pretty much sold.
Well, one final thing before we go. What I love about Doc Mullis is how often he says that, one of the great parts of his career is that he was able to marry his passion and his love of sports and broadcasting and be able to make a living out of it. And he and I have talked about when we started out, I believe, if I have it correctly, you made 165 a week in your first broadcast job. Is that right?
160.
160.
I wish it were 165, but
yeah, I gave you a raise. I'm sorry. Yeah. And my first journalism job in Arizona, a couple of years after that, I got 180. And Doc often says,
should have had Tom negotiate.
Yeah, we should have. We should have had an agent. We'd have done better. But Doc has said to me that the one thing when he accepted that money, that he knew that John Wismer, who owned the radio station, felt he had done a good job of negotiating and, had squeezed Mike a little bit, and he wished he would have asked for more. But he said, hey, the joke was on him because I would have done it for nothing. And I've stolen that line from Mike. And I've written a couple of stories when I've talked about him and I always add the fact that both of us would have done our jobs for nothing.
It's true.
Just because we enjoyed it so much to be able to do something we really, really like. So I appreciated that. Mike, it's been a pleasure having you on. Thanks for joining the Laidlaw and Allen podcast. And I'm going to wish you luck on the book, which is also wishing me luck as well. So
good. Good to see Tom again.
Good to see. We're going to take you up on that. Have you on that show with Greshner and Maloney, so we can straighten Greshner out.
Okay, yeah. I hope Dave will be on my side because that'll be 2-1.
Yeah, you'll have a good time with that show. Those guys have a really fun time. So
okay, good.
Thanks a lot, everybody.
Thank you. All right.